There is a specific kind of suffering that has no adequate name in the culture that produces it. Not the suffering of obvious illness, not the suffering of clear trauma or visible hardship, or the kinds of difficulty that the surrounding world recognizes readily as genuine and responds to with appropriate concern. Something more pervasive and more quietly damaging than any of those things. The specific suffering of a person who has spent their entire life measuring themselves against a standard of normality that was never actually designed with them in mind, and finding themselves, by that standard, consistently, inexplicably, despite genuine effort, insufficient. Gabor Maté called this the myth of normal, not in the sense that normality is a fiction with no content. There are genuine statistical regularities in human experience and behavior that the concept of normal is attempting to describe. But in the sense that what contemporary culture has designated as normal, the specific emotional, behavioral, relational, and physiological profile that is treated as the healthy baseline against which all variation is measured, is itself the product of a specific set of cultural conditions. Conditions that are not neutral, that are not simply the natural expression of human health, that are, in many of their most significant features, actively incompatible with the genuine flourishing of the human beings they claim to describe. The myth of normal in Gabor Maté's understanding is the specific cultural fiction that what the contemporary Western world produces in its average, well-functioning, socially adapted citizen represents genuine human health. And the consequence of this fiction, for the people who were never able to conform to it, who were always somehow too much or too little or too different to fit comfortably within its requirements, is a specific and genuinely serious form of suffering that the myth itself makes nearly impossible to accurately name. Because if normal is healthy, then not normal is unhealthy. If the standard is correct, then the deviation from the standard is the problem, and the person who was never normal to begin with is left with the specific, exhausting, often lifelong project of locating the difficulty in themselves rather than in the standard that was applied to them. Today, I want to give you the honest account of what that project costs and what becomes available when the myth is finally, honestly, seen for what it actually is. The first cost of the myth of normal for the person who was never normal to begin with is the specific, accumulated, often entirely unconscious burden of pathologized difference. Every quality that distinguished the never-normal person from the culturally prescribed standard has been, in the ordinary course of their developmental history, treated as a problem requiring correction. The sensitivity that registered more of the emotional environment than the surrounding adults found comfortable. The intensity of engagement with ideas or experiences that exceeded what the educational and social environment could accommodate. The specific quality of relational attunement, the depth of empathy, the accuracy of emotional perception, the genuine interest in what is actually happening beneath the surface of social interaction, that the performance-organized social world found disruptive. These qualities were not problems, they were features, genuine, developmentally coherent, often extraordinarily valuable features of a specific kind of human mind and nervous system. But the myth of normal has no adequate category for genuine human variation that does not fit the standard profile. It has only the category of deviation. And deviation, in the myth of normal's framework, is always in the direction of insufficiency rather than in the direction of genuine difference. The person who received the accumulated message through educational assessments, through clinical diagnoses, through the specific quality of adult response to their genuine nature across the years of their formation, that their difference was their deficit, carries that message into adult life as a specific and significant interior burden. The burden of a self that has been measured against a standard it was never designed to meet and found wanting by a standard that was never designed to measure what it actually has. Gabor Maté was precise about the physiological consequence of this burden. The chronic self-assessment organized around a standard of normality that the genuine self cannot meet produces a specific and sustained stress response. The biological expression of a self that is continuously below the level of conscious awareness, failing to meet the requirements it has internalized as the measure of its own adequacy. The second cost is the specific relational consequence of being never normal in a world organized around the performance of normality. The never normal person learns very early that genuine self-expression, the authentic presentation of what they actually are, what they actually feel, what they actually perceive, produces social consequences that the more normal adjacent presentation does not. The depth of genuine engagement that exceeds what the social context can accommodate. The honest perception of what is actually happening beneath the surface of the social interaction that is not welcome in a social context organized around the maintenance of the surface. And so the never normal person develops with varying degrees of success and at varying degrees of personal cost, the specific capacity for the performance of normality, the management of the genuine self into a presentation that is sufficiently close to the standard to permit adequate social functioning, the calibration of authentic expression to what the surrounding social context can receive without disruption. This performance is exhausting, not because it is impossible. The never normal person who has spent decades practicing it becomes remarkably skilled at it, but because it is continuous, because there is no context in which the full genuine self is simply welcome as it is, without the editing and the management and the careful calibration that the myth of normal requires of everyone who does not naturally conform to it. And the relational consequence of this continuous performance is the specific quality of relational loneliness that many never normal people carry throughout their lives. The experience of being known, genuinely known, known in the full depth of what they actually are rather than in the managed version they have learned to present as something that is genuinely unavailable. That requires conditions of safety and genuine acceptance that the myth of normal social world so rarely provides. The third cost is the internalization of the myth's judgment as self-judgment. This is perhaps the most personally significant and most difficult to address of all the costs, because the myth of normal is not experienced by the person who has been formed within it as an external cultural standard that can be evaluated and found wanting. It is experienced as simply the truth about what health is and what it requires. And the self that consistently falls short of that truth does not, in most cases, question the truth. It questions itself. The never normal person who has internalized the myth of normal as the measure of their own adequacy does not typically arrive at the conclusion that the standard is wrong. They arrive at the conclusion that they are, that the specific qualities that distinguish them from the standard, the sensitivity, the intensity, the depth of engagement, the specific profile of capacities and challenges that the myth has designated as deviation, are evidence of their own insufficiency rather than evidence of the standard's inadequacy. Gabor Maté understood this internalization as one of the most significant contributors to the psychological suffering of the people who were never normal to begin with, not the genuine difficulties that their specific profile produced. Those difficulties are real and they deserve genuine acknowledgement, but the additional and entirely unnecessary layer of self-judgment that the myth of normal adds to those genuine difficulties. The specific, chronic, physiologically costly experience of a self that is continuously measuring itself against a standard that was never designed to accommodate it and finding itself continuously wanting. The fourth cost is the specific way the myth of normal makes genuine healing more difficult. The person whose suffering has been produced substantially by the impossible project of conforming to a standard they were never designed to meet, cannot genuinely heal within the framework that produced the suffering, because the therapeutic frameworks that are most available, organized as they are around the restoration of normal functioning, the reduction of deviation from the standard, the management of the qualities that distinguish the person from the norm, reproduce the myth's fundamental error. They locate the problem in the person's deviation rather than in the standard's inadequacy. Genuine healing for the never normal person requires something that the myth of normal framework cannot provide: the specific, honest, genuinely compassionate acknowledgement that the standard itself is the problem, that what was designated as deviation was never deviation from genuine health, that the sensitivity, the intensity, the depth, the specific profile of genuine difference that the myth identified as insufficiency was always a form of genuine human variation that deserved accommodation rather than correction. That acknowledgement, genuinely received, genuinely integrated, genuinely felt, rather than simply intellectually endorsed, changes the interior atmosphere of the healing process completely, from the project of becoming more normal to the project of becoming more genuinely oneself, from the management of deviation to the honest, compassionate, genuinely curious exploration of what the genuine self actually is and what it actually requires. The fifth cost is what the never normal person loses when they succeed at performing normality. The never normal person who successfully learns to perform normality, who develops sufficient skill at managing the genuine self into a presentation that the surrounding world can receive without disruption, pays a specific and significant price for that success. The qualities that the performance is managing into invisibility are not simply socially inconvenient. They are genuinely valuable. The sensitivity is genuine perceptual depth. The intensity is genuine capacity for engagement. The specific difference that the performance is concealing is the source of the never normal person's most genuine contribution. And the performance that conceals it not only from the social world, but from the person themselves. The never normal person who has been performing normality long enough loses reliable access to the genuine qualities that the performance was built to conceal. The sensitivity that was managed into invisibility becomes genuinely difficult to access. The intensity that was calibrated into social acceptability becomes genuinely less available. The specific perceptual depth that the performance required to be contained becomes genuinely harder to find beneath the layers of the performance that became second nature. The sixth cost is the chronic exhaustion of living in environments that were never designed for who you actually are. The myth of normal has produced specific environments, educational systems, workplace structures, social institutions, cultural rhythms of time and attention and stimulation that are organized around the specific profile of the normal that the myth describes. And these environments, however functional they may be for the people whose genuine profile approximates the normal they were designed for, are genuinely exhausting for the people whose genuine profile does not. Not because those people are less capable, because they are deploying a significant portion of their available resource in the continuous management of the mismatch between who they actually are and what the environment requires them to be. The energy that the normal adjacent person does not have to spend on that management is energy that the never normal person cannot spend on genuine engagement, genuine creativity, genuine contribution. And the cumulative cost of this management across the years and decades of navigating environments that were never designed to accommodate the genuine self is one of the most significant and most consistently unacknowledged contributors to the chronic exhaustion that so many never normal people carry as what they have come to understand as simply their nature, simply how much energy they have, simply the amount of the world they can sustain before requiring withdrawal. It is not their nature, it is the cost of the mismatch, and the distinction matters enormously for what genuine support actually looks like. The seventh cost, The most important, the one that Gabor Maté returned to most consistently as the deepest and most genuinely serious consequence of what the myth of normal does to the people who were never normal to begin with. It makes the genuine self feel like the problem. This is the specific, profound, and entirely unnecessary tragedy at the heart of the myth of normal's influence on the never normal person. The sensitivity that is the source of their most genuine capacities, for empathy, for depth of perception, for genuine relational attunement, is experienced as something to be managed. The intensity that is the source of their most genuine engagement with ideas, with creative work, with the full depth of human experience, is experienced as something to be calibrated. The genuine difference that is the source of their most genuine contribution, the specific, irreplaceable, genuinely valuable perspective that only this specific kind of mind and nervous system can provide, is experienced as evidence of insufficiency. Not because the genuine self is actually problematic, but because the myth that was applied to it decided it was, and the person formed within that myth internalized the decision before they had adequate capacity to evaluate whether the myth was accurate. What becomes available when the myth is finally seen clearly, when the never normal person finally has adequate language and adequate framework to understand that what was designated as their deviation was never deviation from genuine health, but deviation from a culturally specific and genuinely inadequate standard, is something that the myth's framework never permitted. The genuine self, seen accurately, for the first time, not as the problem that requires management, as the specific, developmentally coherent, genuinely valuable human being that the myth of normal was never adequate to describe. That seeing does not resolve the genuine difficulties. The sensitivity that produces genuine perceptual depth also produces genuine vulnerability to overstimulation. The intensity that generates genuine engagement also generates genuine exhaustion. The difference that makes the never normal person's contribution genuinely valuable also makes the navigation of a world designed around normality genuinely difficult. But it changes the relationship with those difficulties completely, from the self as the source of the problem to the mismatch as the source of the difficulty, from the project of becoming more normal to the project of understanding what the genuine self actually requires and finding or building the specific conditions in which it can genuinely flourish. That project, honest, compassionate, genuinely informed by accurate understanding of what the genuine self actually is the genuine healing that the myth of normal prevented. And it is available to every person who was never normal to begin with and who has spent years paying the specific costs of a standard that was never designed to accommodate who they actually are. And the privilege of a lifetime, the one Gabor Maté pointed toward with everything he had. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not the normal version, not the managed, calibrated, performed into social acceptability version that the myth required. Who you truly are, which was never the problem, which was always, already, genuinely enough. For the life that was always actually yours, not the normal one, but the genuine one.